Hi there folks, in this video I'm going to be sharing with you some techniques to upgrade how you get feedback. Welcome to the Supporting Champions YouTube channel. My name's Steve Ingham, and in this channel I share different strategies to help you improve performance. Thank you to everyone who's engaged with the channel so far, posting your comments, giving feedback. If you haven't had a chance to subscribe, then please do take a chance to do that. There's also a bell button. If you press that, then you get notified of when new content comes up. So feedback, this is critical if you're interested in developing your own performance. And what I'm specifically going to focus on here is how to get feedback, not necessarily how to give feedback. That's another video, another time. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to give you the bronze, silver, and gold of getting feedback, and then I'm going to give you a top tip as to how you might be able to foster a culture of development and learning via feedback. So what we do know is that from surveys, a Gallup poll showed that people are hungry for feedback. 87% of millennials surveyed, people say they want feedback, but less than a third of people actually get feedback. So if you're interested in developing your performance, then feedback is essential, because we go about our lives and we deliver what we think is necessary, hopefully that it's going to be as effective as possible, but we'll have one view of how effective it was. We might not necessarily have the same perspective of the people that are sat around the table, or that we're engaging with, or that we're providing services to. And so asking for that feedback is important to lever it. Asking for feedback also changes the tone and the relationship you have with the information. So if I was to sit here and say, okay, I've got some feedback for you, or I'd like to give you some feedback, or can I give you some feedback? Most people in that situation, most recipients, will sit there and think, oh no, what have I done wrong? And so you get a rush of blood to some of the stress-based centres, and then what happens is some of the learning and open centres of the brain shut down, and you're less likely to be receiving that feedback in a constructive mindset. If you're asking for feedback, you're on the front foot, you're being proactive in taking it to that person to seek that information. It's on your terms. And importantly, for the person who's actually you're asking that feedback from, the giver of that feedback, it's easier for them too. One thing to recognise is that feedback in sport is quite common. When you're coaching somebody, when you're advising somebody, when you're making some assessments of how they're getting on. So I think there's an opportunity here for people, because whilst it might be standard procedure for a coach and athlete to give each other feedback, I don't see this being done well within teams, between co-workers, to managers, to subordinates. I don't see that being done very well, whether that's the skill of actually giving and receiving feedback, or actually culturing an environment where feedback is encouraged. I like this quote from Tom Stafford from the University of Sheffield. And he said, thanks to feedback, we can become more than simple programs with simple reflexes and develop more complex responses to the environment. It's quite deep, that, isn't it? But I think what it speaks to is about us. We're all organisms on this planet, and every organism receives feedback. It's a stimulus, and then there's a response. And actually, we've got to be better at utilising that information so that we can get better. As Ken Blanchard, the management consultant, said, feedback is the breakfast of champions. You can see why we like that quote. So the bronze level of asking for feedback is simply to ask, have you got any feedback for me? And okay, that's not the most sophisticated question, and it doesn't leave perhaps the most information. However, you're up and running then by asking for feedback. It's better than doing nothing and just ignoring it and trying to hide from it. So that is a good step forward. Have you got any feedback for me? Now, the downside of that particular style of question is that it can elicit quite general feedback, or non-committal, or perhaps avoiding the actual specifics. So somebody, you might say, have you got any feedback from my presentation? And someone might say, yeah, it was good. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And it's quite general. It's quite nice. So that's a certain sector of people who will just probably avoid getting into the nitty-gritty or giving you some specifics. There are a certain set of people, myself would be included. If someone asks for feedback, I'll offer something more constructive. Upgrading that to a silver level of feedback requires you to sort of hone in a little bit of what could I have done to make that better. And so somebody who's giving feedback, then they're in a situation where they've got to pin their thoughts to the mast. They've got to offer you something tangible that can allow you to upgrade your performance. The other side of that particular type of question is, what could I have done that's better? What did you actually enjoy that I did? So that actually reinforces some of your performance. And then the first question asks for areas that can allow you to stretch and develop your abilities. Now, upgrading this to the gold level of feedback is where you're already working on your own performance, or you're working on a particular area of your performance, and you ask for specific feedback on a particular area. So if I was giving a presentation, if I was standing up and it was a slide set and I was trying to deliver with impact, it may well be that the clarity of my words or the projection of my voice are areas that I'm starting to work on. And so asking somebody, I'm working on this particular area, projection of voice or communicating with impact, what could I have done better in that area? And so you're honing in on an area that you've already identified as a need for your own development. That's gold level of feedback, so that you've got something very specific, very tangible that can be actionable. And so it asks the person who's giving feedback to be very specific in the areas that could be better. Equally, there's the flip side of that question of what could I have done better, of what did you really like in that specific area. Now, taking that a little bit further, what you could do is ask that person just to keep an eye on how you get on delivering that aspect of your performance over time. So rather than just a little snapshot view of how did I get on today, this is a case of, well, I've got another presentation coming up in 3 or 6 months' time. Can you see how I get on then too? And what that does is create just that little bit of social accountability for your own goals. And hopefully you're in a situation where you can identify somebody that you can trust and develop, and maybe there's a back scratching bit there going on. You give me feedback on this and I'll give you feedback on that. Now, my final tip is aimed at developing a culture of feedback. And so this is aimed at people who have some responsibility. That could be a project, that could be for people, managing teams, for example. It's typical that if you're working, that you go and ask your boss for feedback. Sometimes you're likely to ask for your peers for feedback. Now, my top tip here is, if you're responsible for something, ask people that report to you for feedback. I don't really like the word subordinates, but hierarchically, it's that category of people you're asking feedback from them. And what this does is a couple of things. Firstly, it will unlock some intelligence that allows you to develop. They will be thinking about how you're performing. They'll be critiquing that. So they'll be thinking about it, and that's useful for you. But importantly, what it does is it signals authentic vulnerability, showing you are open, showing that you are receptive for that information. And for the managers who might be thinking, oh, I don't want to ask my subordinates for feedback, you can bet your bottom dollar it will be a lot easier for you to give feedback if you've already set the tone that this is the way that we're going to work. You're probably going to see, if you're asking for feedback from other people, is there a domino effect here, that other people will be much more comfortable asking each other for feedback because the leader and the boss is doing that too. And so that starts a cascade of a culture of feedback, which ultimately lifts the individual and lifts the whole team. Hopefully this structure has been useful for you. Often when we want to go and find some feedback, it can be quite a nervy experience. So I'd encourage you to be brave, but I'd also encourage you to take ownership for your development, for your learning, and don't expect it just to be offered on a platter. If you're interested in developing your performance, then you'll go and seek feedback as information that can improve the way you work. Hopefully this video has been useful for you. If this type of content is interesting for you, then there's a button below. Definitely press subscribe. Thanks for watching.